Thank you all for coming today. My name is Caitlin Stranell and I'm a staff member at Citizens Nuclear Information Centre. Today we have two eminent speakers from the US and from South Korea who will be discussing the problems with the nuclear fuel cycle in their respective countries, as well as possible alternatives to this policy. They will be joined by Cnic's Bureau Chief, Matsuko Hajime, who will tell us about the situation regarding the nuclear fuel cycle in Japan. So to give you some idea of the program today, first of all, we will be having Professor Von Hippel speaking, and that will be he will be talking about does reprocessing reduce the danger of waste disposal? And following that, Jun Min Kang will be giving a presentation about reprocessing in Korea. After that, we'll have question and answers from the floor. Then we will have a 10-minute break. And after that, Matsuko Hajime will give his presentation on the situation in Japan. And we will also have another question and answer session following that. Then finally, Professor Von Hippel will give another presentation on dry cask or alternatives to reprocessing. And Professor Kang will give his final presentation, and then we'll have more question and answers. So there's 3 question and answer sessions, and I hope that everyone can ask any questions that they may have. It's going to be a very detailed and intense discussion today, so I hope you enjoy it. I would like to introduce briefly the speakers today. We have Professor Frank Von Hippel, who's a professor at the Program on Science and Global Security at Princeton University. He has a very long and distinguished career, spanning from the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy to the International Panel on Fissile Materials. We also have Dr. Jun Min Kang from South Korea, who is an independent nuclear analyst. He has worked at the Natural Resources Defense Council and was a chair of the Korean Nuclear Safety Commission until last year. He received his PhD from Tokyo University in nuclear engineering. Okay, so first of all, I would like to welcome Frank to give his presentation.
Okay, yeah, that's the current, when it comes to reprocessing, the questions change, but the answer is always reprocessing. And the current argument that is made for reprocessing is that it's necessary to eliminate plutonium and other long-lived elements in the spent fuel to make radioactive waste disposal safer. Now, I'm just going to go through the arguments and, in fact, explain to you why this argument is not correct. First of all, it's argued that reprocessing reduces the volume of radioactive waste. And this is based on an analysis of French practices. The French pioneered reprocessing of spent fuel. And you see that on the left is the volume of the waste, and on the right is the volume of the repository. And the volume of the waste depends on how you package it. And you see on the left, I guess you had to, here, the volume of spent fuel. And spent fuel is fuel rods with space in between. If you remove the space in between, the volume is much less. And here you see a somewhat less, smaller change depending on different practices, but you see that depending on how you package spent fuel, depending on the size of the package, it can have a larger or smaller volume than the radioactive waste, which is produced in France. Now on the right, you see the volume in the repository, and you can see that the volume does not change very much. This is the radioactive reprocessing waste with different possible variations, and this is the volume with the spent MOX fuel in the repository. And the reason, let's see. Not enough hands. The next slide, please. The reason is the amount of space that radioactive waste takes up in the repository depends on the amount of heat it generates, radioactive heat. And spent MOX fuel generates more heat, about 5 times more heat than spent fuel, the original spent fuel that is produced from more enriched uranium. And so you have to put, to avoid heating the rock up to temperatures that are too high, you have to make the spaces in the tunnel between the spent fuel casks larger if you're burying MOX fuel. Now, after you produce MOX fuel, taking the plutonium out and putting it back into a water-cooled reactor, it becomes less effective. And because the water-cooled reactors don't fission, they don't fission all of the plutonium isotopes. And so it's proposed to have fast neutron reactors, like Monju, then continue the process. And here it's an imaginary situation, which is really what is being proposed by the advocates of reprocessing and fast neutron Monju type reactors. So the first generation of water-cooled reactors produced spent fuel with about 320 tons of plutonium. That's separated out and made into MOX fuel. And the second generation then produces the MOX fuel does not reduce the amount of plutonium very much. And so then you separate it out and you put it in fast neutron reactors like Monju. And after 40 years, you get another generation of fast reactors, and then finally you've reduced the original plutonium. You assume that there are no more water-cooled reactors after the first generation. You get the spent fuel from one fast reactor, and then you dispose of that. Now already in the first in Rukasha, the reprocessing plant that's built does not separate out americium and neptunium, which are two other long-lived elements. And so they go directly into the repository. And so in fact, you have not reduced the amount of long-lived elements that much. And in fact, you have more and more coming in the later cycles. So this is a complete fantasy, and it doesn't make any sense. And it really is an argument just to justify the continuation of reprocessing in fast neutron reactors. Now, here is the argument about why it's important to reduce the toxicity of spent fuel by removing the plutonium. And there is something to this argument, but in fact, not too much. This shows the heat of the spent fuel as a function of time. You see 100 years, 1,000 years, 10,000 years. And you see the plutonium and the americium, which is a decay product of the plutonium, dominate the long-term heat from this spent fuel. And so the argument is if you remove these, then you will reduce the amount of heat, long-term heat, and with fast reactors, say. And also the approximately the heat, the radioactivity, the energy, radioactive energy that's generated in this spent fuel, it's also proportional to that toxicity. And so if you eliminate these the argument is if you eliminate these long-term, long-lived plutonium isotopes, then you'll reduce the danger. But this argument is only true if the danger is that somebody will dig down 500 meters and eat the spent fuel. The question is what is the danger to people on the surface? And this is a very complicated graph. But what it shows is this is this Swedish company that is responsible for Sweden's spent fuel repository, and they ask themselves the question: what if the spent fuel cask fails right away? What if the clay surrounding the cask fails right away? what if the water gets into the cask right away and starts dissolving the spent fuel and then carrying the radioactivity up to the surface? What are the different isotopes, radioactive isotopes in the spent fuel contribute to the dose of the people on the surface? And you see here that the plutonium, this curve, is not the largest curve. It does dominate the heat deep down in the repository, but the plutonium is relatively insoluble. So it's only, not that much of it would be carried up to the surface. It's assumed, by the way, in this scenario that the water from the repository is used for drinking water, it's used to water the plants that people eat. But you see, then you look at, well, what would be the largest doses from the repository? What are the, the first one in the short term is carbon-14. And carbon-14 is actually, the plan is to discharge that into the atmosphere. So in fact, that's what the reprocessors plan to do. And then comes iodine-129 in the longer term. This is, you see, we're talking 100,000, 10,000, 100,000, a million years. And iodine in France and the plant in Ricaccio is to be put into the ocean. And then finally, in the very long term, the million years, you have radium. But the radium is not produced by the reactors. Radium is actually a decay product of the uranium-238 that was originally mined to make the fuel. So in fact, the hazard at this point is comparable to the hazard from an underground deposit of uranium. So in fact, this is just an excuse. I would add also that there is tritium in the spent fuel, and the plan for Ricaccio is to release it into the ocean, and the amount of tritium in the spent fuel from the operations of I think it's 1 year of operations would be 10 times the amount of tritium in the water at Fukushima that is stored. There's such controversy about putting the tritium. So the reprocessing is not a way to clean, to reduce the hazard from radioactive waste. From spent fuel, it actually increases it by dumping all this radioactivity into the surface environment. There's also another problem with reprocessing plants, which is they can have accidents just like reactors. And in fact, the first large nuclear accident was an accident at a reprocessing plant in the Soviet Union in 1957. It was kept secret. It was kept secret by the Soviets, and it was also kept secret by the American and the British intelligence services who knew about it because they did not want people to be worried about reprocessing in the West. But you see, it was a huge accident. It was comparable to the Chernobyl accident. Here are two large cities nearby. This is 200 kilometers. And fortunately, the wind did not blow at either of these cities. More recently, there was another reprocessing plant accident in another one of Russia's reprocessing cities. Fortunately, the amount of radioactivity in the waste that exploded in this case was not very large, but you could see the power of the explosion. So this is the last slide. and it's just statements by the authorities in different countries about what the benefits are or are not of, as far as reducing the dangers from radioactive waste, the benefits or the lack of benefits from separating out the plutonium and the other so-called transuranic elements and fissioning them. And these are statements, the oldest one was made by a study by the U.S. National Academy of Sciences more than 20 years ago. And then there's the study from the French nuclear safety authorities. And then most recently, criticism by the chairman of Japan's Atomic Energy Commission of the falsehoods, the false claims that are being made for the environmental benefits of reprocessing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Frank. Without further ado, I'd like to call on our next speaker, Dr. Khan.
この使用済み燃料のことでですね、この問題をある程度減らすということで、韓国の原権対立というんですけど、ここでパイロプロセッシングという鑑識再処理の研究を、90年末から始めて、今も続けているんですけど、それからこの時に、再処理の研究と高速炉の研究、高速炉の研究はその前なんですけど、ずっとやっているんです。20年以上の研究をして、目的はですね、使用済み燃料、これはちょっと長いんですけど、パイロプロセッシングの必要性について帰りの主張なんです。で、もともとですね、帰りが主張しているのは、韓国で使用済み燃料が10万トンも出るという2100年までにですね、そういう予測をして、その使用済み燃料を全部埋めるためには、80平洋キロメートルに達する、結構大きな面積が必要だと。それで、韓国ではこういう面積の場所はないということで、その面積をとにかく減らさなければならない。ということで、このパイロプロセッシングと、高速炉の組み合わせで、その面積を100分の1にする。そういう例文でこの研究を続けているんです。でもさっきマリケル教授が話したように、これは全部嘘なんです。で、これは鑑識再処理のを示しているんですけど、鑑識再処理は軽水炉の使用済み燃料だけをですね、こういうふうに分解して、その金属化して、それを電気生成して、その中からプルトニウムの混合物をですね、出して、それを燃料に清浄して、高速炉に燃やすという、こういう立場になっている。で、この固定でですね、出る気体の放射性ウエストとかですね、ものも、こっちではローレベルになっているんですけど、実際はローレベルじゃなくてハイレベルなんです。ですから、ここの固定から出るウエストはですね、全部工場に放射性廃棄物が出るんです。で、これは韓国の大理がですね、米軍にしているそれなんですけど、使用済み燃料をですね、パイロプロセッシングをするとして、高速炉で燃やすとですね、ボリュームのリダクションとかですね、毒性の減らすとかですね、植物の面積を減らすとか、こういうふうにしているんです。これは実際にこの高速炉を初めに開発したときには、燃焼炉じゃなくて増殖炉として開発したんです。で、それはですね、文殊と同じで、これは世界で全部失敗し終わっている状況なんです。それとこれはですね、前韓国経験圏外で計画したものでですね、高速炉は2028年で、10分の1ぐらいの高速炉を運転する。この計画と、これの燃料をですね、使用済み軽水炉使用済み燃料をパイロプロセッシングして、利用する。で、これは小さいですけど、しかもこれは研究開発という名分なんですけど、ここでですね、米国の使用済み高速炉燃料はですね、年間そこに入っているプルトニウムは年間核兵器20機から40機まで 核兵器を作れる量のプルトニウムが出ます。でこれは今の政権は脱着原発という立場なんですけど、今の政権でも使用済み燃料の管理はどうすればいいかとわからないんで、まだこの計画はまだ行き絶えたわけではありません。それともし次の政権が保守政権になるとまたこの計画は復活するかもしれません。で新しい米韓日産協定とパイプセンシングはですね、これは韓国は再処理の、主張をし続けたので、アメリカはそれを認めることできないことで、とにかく、10年間の間にこのサイクル研究をして、後で何か交渉をしましょうということで、ですね、パイプセンシングの研究を2001年から今続けてるんですけど、それはアメリカと韓国で今やっている共同研究なんです。でこれの目的は実際に使用済み燃料のですね、経済性とか実際にいろんなことを考えてるなんか法案を設けるべきこの目的で始まったんですけど、結局今の状況ではアメリカと韓国でですね、廃炉設備の開発のための研究になっているということなんです。パイプセンシングの効果の講義なんですけど、これはフランク・ニッペル先生がよく説明したようにですね、プルトニウムの分離と使用は全然経済的ではない。プルトニウムを分離し核分裂させてもですね、使用済み燃料の新地化処分のもともと小さいリスクをそれほど減らさない。分離時に使用済みプルトニウムは核兵器に直接利用可能な物質である。でプルトニウムは新地化処分場に埋める使用済み燃料に入れたままにしておいた方が良い。こういうよく結論ついています。しかも帰りはですね、集中している面積の縮小のためにですね、セシウム137というそれとストロンチウムの90という一番毒性が強い使用済み燃料の中の学習をですね、地上で何百年も調理しなければならない。そうなんだということなんです。しかも韓国でこういうパイプセンシングをするのはですね、ただの軽水炉の使用済み燃料で重水炉の使用済み燃料はしないんですよ。そうすると韓国で直接処分ができないかということを考えるとですね、これは韓国の同じ帰りの研究所で研究したものでですね、2キロ2キロの地下処分場でですね、使用済み燃料の軽水炉の2万トンの建造の1万6000トンが処分することができる。でここでは使用済み燃料を40年で冷却した過程をするんですけど、半分は30年。この冷却期間をですね、ちょっと増やしてですね、60年とか70年とか、そうするともうちょっと冷却されて、ここにもうちょっと大量の使用済み燃料が処分することができるということです。しかもこれは2キロ弱なんですけど、これをちょっと増やせば、さっき韓国で発生する2万7000の軽する使用済み燃料は全部埋めることができる。ですから1個の処分場で全部できるということを分かって、それとですね、これは実際に この地下の処分場は2キロ、2キロといってもですね、地上はです。もっとこの小さい面積です。地上はこの小さいので、あまりこの環境への影響はそんなに大きくないことなんです。それでですから、この若干修正したらですね、韓国の処分場の標準な処分場システムでですね、韓国で出る軽水炉と貯水炉の修繕燃料を全国の処分することができるということなんです。しかもですね、今この新しく環境研究が続けているのはですね、これ一つで処分するんじゃなくて、2つの2層を処分するというデザインをやっています。ですから、もっと大量の修繕燃料を処分できるということなんです。結論です。で、パイプセッティングに関する韓国原電の正常化論はですね、使用済み燃料の量、熱負荷、毒性を減らすこと、つまり最終処分の面積と毒性を減らすことにより、韓国で建設可能とすることです。軽水炉使用済み燃料をですね、パイププロセッシングを採取しても、韓国ではパイププロセッシングから出る高レベル廃棄物と韓流用の使用済み燃料のための中層処分場が必要です。パイププロセッシングは大きな費用をかけてですね、ただ核拡散とテロリストのリスクを高めるだけで、放射性廃棄物が環境に与える影響をあまり減らさない話をしないということなんです。韓国の処分システムによってですね、寿命期間の間出る全部の軽水炉の使用済み燃料と重水炉の使用済み燃料を一つの処分場で処分することができる。ですから韓国でですね、使用済み燃料管理のためにパイルプロセッシングをする必要は全然ないんです。ですから韓国でこういうパイルプロセッシング高速炉の研究をやめた方がいいと私は中止するということを主張しています。以上です。